The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. I somehow hooked our microphones up backwards, so that would explain why mine wasn't coming through the board. That explains a lot, but we are on the air with the Nerdcast News Report for this Wednesday, February 12th, 2025, and it is going to be a very interesting edition of the Nerdcast News Report as we are talking all things WWE and NXT right out of the gate, because we definitely had a big moment last night on NXT. We were planning on talking about some AEW releases. Well, we're going to talk about one of them right out of the gate today as we get you caught up on all the news you're going to need to know for this Wednesday. Joining me in studio, as always, is Mike. Mike, how's it going?
Can I talk? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. I was a little worried about that when I first spoke and didn't hear anything.
Yeah,
but
I hooked him into 2 and 3 instead of 1 and 2, which explains why I was muted as well. So,
but yeah, you think you're safe to kind of do your prep for the stories that you have on hand, and then middle of last night, it's like, wait, the story just changed, something new broke, and you pivot from there. I thought things might move fast, but they moved even faster than I was anticipating, and I'm really excited to talk about it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were really surprised to see a former AEW talent on NXT television last night, and that is where we are going to start today's Nerdcast News Report, and it is Ricky Starks making an appearance last night, as you see on our thumbnail for our program today. Coming out into the crowd on NXT last night, and I think nobody was surprised to see him in WWE. I think a lot of people were surprised to see him there that quickly because the news had just broken over the weekend, and we'll kind of get to more of that in a little bit, that he was among a couple of different AEW talent that were removed from the roster on their website, which basically has generally signaled when somebody's contract is either has expired or they have been let out of their contract, which that appears to be the case for several of these talent, that they were let out early. AEW clearly not doing anything with a lot of these guys, and so basically Starks was able to move on pretty quickly, and that is exactly what he did, showing up last night and kind of giving the whole, you know who I am, but you don't know why I'm here type speech. And obviously the live crowd on NXT was fired up. Pretty much every major WWE wrestler that has some connection to Ricky Starks posted on social media to give their seal of approval, and just really cool moment. And, he had not wrestled on AEW television since March of 2024 when he was a part of the World Tag Team title tournament with Big Bill losing to Top Flight. So it's, going to be interesting to see what happens, but certainly a big surprise on NXT television that certainly rewarded the people that were there in attendance and the people who decided to tune in last night.
Yeah, like I said, I kind of figured some of these people might show up relatively quickly, but you pretty much heard day of, like, oh, these guys could probably appear at any time now since they've been removed off the website, which seems like a weird, like, that's some sort of legally binding thing. Well, if they're not on the website, clearly their contract is no longer, there's no non-compete, everything's good. But, everyone was speculating that there would be no non-compete, no strings attached, and lo and behold, we get Ricky Starks on NXT. This is another instance, and I think Ethan Page is probably the best example prior to this of them just immediately rolling out the red carpet and saying, hey, we're going to treat you like you're a really big deal. Obviously, Starks hasn't wrestled yet. It was just an appearance in the crowd, but all signs point to they're going to treat him like he matters, and I think that's got to be appealing to anyone who's maybe not too thrilled with their current standing in the wrestling industry, whether it be in AEW or even elsewhere.
Well, I think the thing that's really telling about Ricky Starks is that a lot of the guys that have made the jump from AEW to NXT have been treated like big stars right out of the gate. Ethan Page has been treated like a big star. Even Shawn Spears, who is probably on the back half of his career at this point. I think that's fair to say, but he was involved in the main event closing angle of the show last night with his new group, basically brutalizing the Dawn after the North American title match in the cage. And, I think when you look at that kind of stuff and you are Ricky Starks or other talent that maybe is yet to be released from AEW, you just think, okay, like WWE is serious about taking guys that in the past probably would not have been on WWE's radar. Maybe they were a little undersized. Maybe they still needed to develop to some degree. And Vince wasn't really interested in those guys, especially if they were smaller. Not that Starks is small. He's 6 foot tall. So, I mean, he's, average height. But, I thought it was kind of a brilliant move to bring him out amongst the fans because it made him stand out even more amongst the, no offense to the NXT crowd, but the wrestling fans that were there. You have
that crowd's going to know who he is.
Yeah, and they did. They chanted his name, although his name wasn't said on WWE television, and there could be a couple of reasons for that. I think the first knee-jerk reaction, everybody's, they're going to change his name, and they might. They might decide, or he might decide that he wants something different to kind of establish his WWE persona as something separate from everything he's done before. The other issue that could be holding it up is, when you get signed by a company, generally in this day and age, you will then give them the rights to use your name, to license your name on merchandise and things like that. And while that stuff typically expires when your contract expires, there could be some red tape holding that up, and there could be, maybe AEW still hanging on to or in the process of canceling their licenses on his name. So using his name on television might be a bit problematic. But, I don't know how they'll go with it. I don't think it's going to make much of a difference with him. I think whatever they decide to do is he's gonna be a star regardless of what name they call him.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this just further highlights the importance of where they've positioned NXT now, where you can bring people into NXT and it doesn't feel like, oh, they must not think he matters. Like, there's no question that you can move on to NXT and do really big things. And, when you look at kind of that first crop of defectors from AEW, for a while, you probably could have pointed at Alexis King or Shawn Spears and said, well, they're not really doing a whole lot with these guys. And, look, fast forward to now, Alexis King, Heritage Cup champion, doing some great character work as far as kind of the slow evolution of him to kind of embracing who he is. And then with Spears, he was building this group, but they weren't really necessarily doing a whole lot. And then you had a kind of a big statement last night with the end of the show. And, you're running out of examples of people that they haven't utilized that they've brought over from AEW.
And there's two good reasons to go ahead and stick him on NXT. Really three. Number one is obviously you're going to introduce him to your crowd. Even though your hardcore people in the arena know who he is, the wide-ranging NXT, WWE audience might not know who he is. So this is a chance to kind of introduce him. What can he do? Why is everybody so high on him? You can do that. Number two, the men's division in NXT was kind of left a little thin after the recent call-ups and potential further call-ups because you have a feeling
we're not done.
Trick Williams is almost certainly on his way to the main roster sooner rather than later, and there'll be others. So you need another guy who can come in and be a top guy, and Ricky Starks can do that. And then, the final piece is kind of the logical piece. I mean, you're adding somebody right before WrestleMania when you have a lot of your creative spoken for, and the last thing you want is to bring somebody up and just have them flounder. They still struggle with that on the women's side. They still at times bring women up and don't know what to do with them. And we could even get into at some point the booking in differences between the women on the main roster and the women on NXT, because on the main roster you have Bayley beat your Intercontinental Champion and then not show any signs at all that she's going to come back and challenge her for the title. Meanwhile, Cora Jade beats Bayley on NXT television last night, and that doesn't even seem out of place because that's just the way NXT operates. It's just totally different. But
mean, I'm kind of hoping we see maybe by WrestleMania Bayley come around and say, "Wait a minute, I pinned the Intercontinental Champion. This is a new title I haven't had. Let me go after it." Otherwise, what are we doing with her come WrestleMania season?
Yeah. That's a great question, and I think we'll have to kind of see where that goes. But, like Rachel mentioned, and I posted in our Discord this morning, The Undertaker and Bully Ray were live on SiriusXM last night when Ricky Starks came out, and, definitely popped for him. And you had The Undertaker basically talking about his experiences with Ricky Starks and talking about what a model citizen he is and all this. Again, another example of guy who gets a reputation in AEW because of whatever reason. Immediately you have guys putting him over as the easiest guy to work with and humble and all this other stuff the day he walks in the door in WWE.
It's funny because initially you thought, well, Starks has connections with WWE. He's clearly friends with Cody. And then come to find out that these connections run way deeper than you ever first realized. That's something. But yeah, we've talked about it before. WWE is in a position where there's no need for them to bring in people and work with people who may be issues for them. They don't have that kind of necessity for certain stars. I think they can pick and choose who they want to bring in, who they want to elevate, and if your reputation is that you're a model guy and always willing to listen and work well with these legends, I think that's going to go a long way.
Yeah, for sure. And again, it's going to be interesting to see, what he ends up doing, whether he shows up at Vengeance Day this weekend, which we'll have a preview of briefly on Friday during the news report. Also be interesting to see what this other group is that's going to debut at Vengeance Day that they've been teasing. Clearly some PC candidates, everybody seems to say, that are ready to move up onto the NXT main roster.
And they did also tease that we'd be seeing more of the system from TNA and NXT, which, to be honest, I mean, you look at someone like a Moose, and even more so probably the Edwards, Eddie Edwards and his wife. Like, I'm excited at the thought of seeing them on a WWE program.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely both those guys could use a wider exposure, and I think WWE would provide that, both talented guys in the business. But yeah, lots of things to be excited about with NXT and WWE coming up soon, and there could be more reasons to be excited soon. That kind of gets us to what we originally thought was going to be our top story of the day, and that is the fact that we did have a group of releases, at least as Mike said, as much as you can tell with somebody just not being on the website. But so far, at least with AEW, that's been a pretty good indication of their contract status when they pop off the website. We also had Malachi Black, and we had Miro, who disappeared from the website. Obviously, both former WWE guys, both former Triple H guys in WWE. I think if they're interested, everybody kind of expects them to both make a return to WWE. Certainly, Black has been teased in the Penta Chad Gable saga as someone who runs a karate, or not karate, but
like an
MMA school that is the dark arts, which is what they keep referencing over and over again, like they're hitting you over the head with it. And yet some people who've been in the wrestling industry and in journalism for years keep assuming that Chad Gable's going to AAA to wrestle matches.
Which I would love that. Don't get me wrong.
For sure. Yeah, totally. But no, I mean, clearly that's Aleister Black coming back. And then, Miro kind of got cut short with the success of Rusev and could be a chance to do that. Looking at cage match, Malachi Black's last match was not as long ago. It was back in November of 2024 in an AEW World Tag Title 4-way match. But Miro has not wrestled on AEW television since December 30th, 2023. He did win his last 7 matches on Collision and All Out and at World's End. So he was definitely one of the guys that was a Collision guy that got pushed to the show that CM Punk was basically had created for him. And that kind of tells you that once Punk was gone, that maybe there wasn't going to be a whole lot for Miro to do because he was never brought back to Dynamite.
You just think, maybe you pick a side and then your side loses in that power struggle, that maybe that kind of leads you to where you're on the outs with the company.
Yeah, and indeed that's been the case. He's wanted to leave for a while, and Tony was like, no. And then I think part of what we can speculate about is You think that with WWE having their releases last week, that it almost gave Tony Khan the reason to kind of slip in with 3 releases of his own, and figuring that people would still be talking about the WWE releases, and maybe he can kind of just sneak them into the world. Probably no idea that Ricky Starks was going to show up on NXT like 2 days later.
Well, it also makes you look a little less like the guy that's holding people hostage. If WWE is so willing to take people that they may not be using overly well and just cutting them loose, you don't want to be that guy that's just, like you said, when was the last time Miro wrestled? Why are you keeping him around?
Yeah. I mean, you're probably paying him well, I would assume. So what are you doing? He wants out.
Yeah.
So let him go. And, clearly they, it's like they said, Tony did at least hold them through the Rumble, so they couldn't come back at the Royal Rumble, which would have been obviously a big way to reintroduce a lot of these guys. But I assume we'll see them both probably sometime during this run up to WrestleMania in some form or fashion. But I can't see any way WWE doesn't re-sign both of them if they both want to come back. Yeah. And I would presume they both want to come back. So
yeah, I think Black is a lock. I think Rusev, I would love to see, especially since they have this agreement with TNA, some sort of revival of the whole Rusev Day thing, since you have Aiden English over there as well. And that could even be something that maybe they run between even NXT and TNA, just do the whole Rusev Day shtick for a while. But you watch Raw and SmackDown and you see kind of these glimpses of what would have happened had Triple H not lost command of the situation a few years ago. I mean, you look at the presentation of teams like the War Raiders and DIY, and it's like, okay, this is kind of what I think he envisioned back in 2017, 2018, and it just took us a little longer to get there.
Yeah, for sure. And we're getting there. And as we've talked about, it's not perfect. They're definitely still working through some things, but overall it is a much easier product to digest and certainly better than AEW at this point by probably a pretty long shot. So we'll see where these guys go and where they pop up, because who knows? We thought maybe it was going to be a little time for all of them, and then Ricky Starks drops in on a Tuesday night, and that kind of changes your mindset as to how long they may slow play these things. But great to see, and be interested to see where they go from here. A couple other quick news items to discuss from some of our other topic areas, and the first one is a story that came out that AXS TV is going to be adding an anime block that will be coming up starting on February the 13th, which is tomorrow, at 10 p.m., which is right after TNA wrestling. So it kind of works out well if you're a wrestling fan. You're going to get a chance to check out some anime. And they're going to be starting out with some Fate Stay Night Unlimited Blade Works. I believe they're also going to be launching My Hero Academia starting next week, I believe.
Yeah.
So these are two pretty much AAA shows, if you will. I hate to necessarily refer to them that way because that kind of carries a negative connotation in the gaming industry, but I think in the anime world, that's still pretty much a positive thing. There's a lot of layers to this, and we probably won't get to all of it today, but first off, great to see anime on AXS, and second, kind of makes you wonder about this company that might be behind this and what their motives are.
Yeah, for sure. I thought it was interesting, and I hadn't really considered it until I read the comments on this story, that essentially AXS has replaced their New Japan Pro Wrestling show with anime.
Yeah.
Which, I'm all for. I think anytime, like you said, you get more anime on television, that's certainly a good thing. I'm kind of curious, like, just from a logical standpoint, the Fate universe is so huge. How come that hasn't been utilized on television up until now? I just think, I don't recall, not even like the original Fate Stay Night, I don't recall it ever being on Toonami or Adult Swim. I could be wrong, but
yeah, I'm not sure.
It just seems like, given how much content there is out there, they should be doing everything they can to get it over as much as possible in the West. I mean, you have all the various anime, you have the mobile game. I just think that there's, as popular as the mobile game is, that alone, there's a crowd that would tune in on television to watch any content relating to it. So I think it's a smart move to bring that in. And as far as this company goes, the Azuki Company, I hadn't really heard about them, even though they made headlines last year. I guess they kind of popped up at first at Anime Expo and kind of came out saying that they had bought the anime.com domain name, which is kind of wild to think that was just laying out there that someone was looking to offload it. I don't know who owned the rights to it prior to that. But yeah, they now have set this thing up, and I'm a little leery because the article does refer to them as a Web3 company, so my concern is that this is going to be just some sort of weird NFT related thing, and I have no interest in that.
Right.
But, as far as what their messaging that they're putting out there is, it seems like they want to be a hub where you can go and watch anime, and they want to kind of reinfuse that with the social element where you can chat with people, you can comment, you can collect goofy things for your character. I went ahead and went onto the website and signed up, which may or may not have been a good idea, but I had to know for sure what it looked like. You create this avatar, and clearly there's like an inventory for whatever nonsense you can buy. That hasn't been fully set up yet. They do have a trailer for the anime that they've had some hand in producing that they're going to live stream sometime this month with live chat as well. It's kind of interesting because you think about Crunchyroll and how they removed comments and basically just stripped the whole social element of watching anime away. I think, assuming these guys aren't some sort of crypto scam, I think there's a place in the market for trying to remarry that anime viewing experience with the social aspect.
Well, and I think, we're seeing a little bit of that. We saw that Animigo, which we were going to talk about today, and it kind of got bumped with all this news. We'll try to get to a little bit of that on Friday. They created their own new anime purchasing website that is to battle with the Crunchyroll store, which of course took over Right Stuff, and now you have this company maybe trying to get inroads on Crunchyroll streaming as well by getting some of these big titles and bringing them over. So I think there's certainly a recognition that having one mega company is not good for anybody, and that allows them to basically set the rules of engagement for how you're going to get anime. Yeah. Like, we'll decide whether you get a physical copy. We'll decide whether you get to comment on it. We'll decide whether the subtitles are machine generated or if we're actually going to have a human being do it. So.
And we'll decide what we think should be retained from the original Japanese in the westernization process.
Yeah. So it's it'll be interesting. I am a little leery about the Web3 thing. I'm not going to lie that you fear that it's a chance for them to scoop up a bunch of big anime and then use it as a front to sell digital nonsense on their website, but maybe not. You want to try to hold out some hope, and at the very least, one glimmer of hope is we're getting more anime on television, which again, coming right after TNA Wrestling, seemed like a pretty logical move. They're going to re-air early Saturday morning, midnight as well. So if you're a night owl and up late like I am, that's a good time to maybe catch some anime as well. So it's probably a kind of a test run, only a couple of shows, see how it does. They're going to probably get a decent lead in from TNA, which should help their ratings on Thursday. So good news, and we'll keep an eye on what this company's up to and see if indeed it ends up being legit or if it ends up being some giant scam that we'll be reporting on somewhere down the road. One final major news item, and again, not a lot to this yet because it's still very early in the process, but just something that I thought was kind of interesting because obviously we're big fans of the Back to the Future movies on this podcast, and supposedly there is a Back to the Future game that is in development. Was mentioned by Bob Gale, who's the co-producer and co-writer of Back to the Future. Of course, the original movie from 1985 spawned a couple of sequels. It's one of those IPs that people still love to this day. I think especially those of us who are, of a certain age, just those were three of just the coolest movies, especially the first two. I think your feelings on the third one can kind of be hit and miss, but I think especially the first one and the second one I thought were just really well done, and the third one was good too. But now there's some talk that potentially we're going to get a video game as well. Don't know what the timeline would be if it happens, but I would think this could be a pretty cool, like almost choose your adventure type of game going through the Back to the Future universe and making decisions and all that stuff. I mean, it could be good potentially.
Yeah, and I think this is definitely one IP that has never really fully gotten the video game treatment it deserved. I think back to the original NES games, and they were pretty awful, actually. And I get it, because the concept of Back to the Future is so ambitious.
Yeah.
It had to have been really difficult to try to create an 8-bit video game that really captures that feeling of what that universe is like. So I understand why those were limited. They had a game back in 2010, like an episodic game that came out that had certainly better reviews than the NES games. But I still think there's more they can do with this. It's amazing to me that and I know 1985, obviously, where that's 40 years, but when you hear it, it's like, God, it really has been 40 years. I don't know if there's been a better trilogy ever made, and I know, like, given what we talk about, that's probably heresy, when I'm sure people that listen to this are just as likely to be huge Lord of the Rings fans.
Sure.
And I get it, but I think as far as just complete trilogies that give you everything, whether it's comedy, drama, action, I just think it's hard to beat the Back to the Future franchise, and I still feel like we as a society have failed because 2015 did not look anything like what it did in Back to the Future 2.
I just think in 1985, they would have thought 2015 was so far into the future, and just look at it now. It's like it was 10 years ago. That is 10 years in the past.
Yeah.
And it still doesn't look like the things that we saw in 2015 and Back to the Future.
Still waiting to hover convert my car.
Yeah, for sure. And the self-drying jacket or whatever it is, and
auto-lacing shoes, which, sounds really more dangerous than it's worth. But
squeeze your foot and just break it. But, a couple of things for those who don't know. I think one thing that really helped with the second and third movies of the trilogy is the fact they were filmed together at the same time.
Yeah.
So, far as continuity goes, it's not perfect, but that's a great way to make sure that your continuity kind of makes sense when you film two movies, one set in the future and one set in the past at the same time, so you don't run into any issues. The other thing, too, is I saw on one of the Facebook pages that just shows random crap, because that's all anybody ever gets on those social media. It was them showing footage of them shooting the train sequences in Back to the Future 3 and how it was all done on a miniature scale. Wow. Like, it's a miniature DeLorean, a miniature train. When the train goes over, spoiler alert, goes over the bridge and crashes, like in the movie, it looks like a real train that they crashed for this. In reality, it's a tiny miniature model that they crashed. They did such an amazing job on that it
looked great.
Until I saw those pictures, I had no idea that was how it was done, completely on miniature scale. But they're movies that hold up the test of time. You can go back and watch them now and get the same enjoyment out of them that you got, 40 years ago. And I
would love to know, when Back to the Future 2 hit, was there like an uptick in like purchasing books that talked about old sports scores, just with people hoping that someday time travel would be a thing and they could kind of recreate the alternative 1985 with themselves playing the Biff Tannen role?
At some point in my youth or teenage years, I was gifted for Christmas one year one of the sports almanacs that they had all the sports results from. I mean, it's ludicrous now to even think that thing existed, because now you just go on the internet and look it up. But it's like I spent so many hours reading that I don't know how many trivia games I won because I knew who won the Rose Bowl back in like 1965, or all this, just these totally useless facts that you just learn. I mean, the big one was like Stanley Cup wins. I would go through and look at that. And, when I would play trivia with our teachers, they would ask, so-and-so won the Stanley Cup. Well, it has to be this year, because that was, the Islanders. They won 4 straight in the early 80s. And just weird stuff like that. But, yeah, I mean, I would imagine there probably was some sort of uptick in people just hoping that someday they could go back and make themselves a millionaire in the future. But it was amazing. Amazing movies.
Yeah,
for
sure.
And I hope they do a really awesome game. And, I would guess.
And I hope they never reboot the franchise.
Yeah, I think it's one of those ones that you just have to leave alone and, upscale it as best you can and just be satisfied with the original, because I'm just not sure you can do it any better than what they did it. Time to get to the finish of today's episode. We are ready for the Empire Express. You ready to go?
Let's do it.
All right, let's take a look at the final stories we're going to talk about today. I'll start off with the odd ones. Yesterday at the New Japan Pro Wrestling New Beginning, Hiroki Goto finally won the IWGP World title, defeating Zack Sabre Jr. It is his first world title in New Japan for the 45-year-old Goto. Happy for him?
Beyond happy for him. The guy won the G1 in 2008, was the runner-up in 2016, has always been super solid in the ring. I feel like this is probably 15 years too late, but definitely excited for him. Alice Cooper has announced additional dates to fill out his spring schedule, which already included Sonic Temple in Columbus on May 9th. Where does the band rank on the list of rock acts you still need to see live?
Pretty much near the top. I'm really excited about Sonic Temple. We've got tickets for that, and I'm really hoping to get to be there to be able to get to see Alice Cooper because, I mean, that's just one of the classic rock acts that I absolutely need to see before they stop touring. Two Japanese bands that evidently I've been mispronouncing their names are. I thought it was OXT. It's Okuto and Myth Android, which is pronounced Miss Android, have announced a collaboration to produce the 10th anniversary song for the Overlord franchise. It will also be each unit's 10-year anniversary. Should be pretty good, right?
I'm still just tripping over the Miss Android thing because, yeah, if you like sounded it out as if you're speaking Japanese, it would totally kind of sound out that way. Yeah, they've both provided really great music over the years for Cautious Hero, Overlord, ReZero, Tanya the Evil, etc. I'm sure any kind of collaboration they do is going to be awesome. So, yeah, looking forward to that. AAA Wrestling in Mexico has announced Triple Mania 33 will begin on August 16th. Why should people check that out?
Because it's a train wreck, and it's amazing. Like, if you can just have no attachment on the results or anything leading up to it, like, don't watch any AAA leading up to it. Don't read anything about it. Just show up on August 16th and watch it, and you'll be entertained. If you just look at it that way, it is 3 hours or 4 hours or 5 hours of mindless entertainment. You'll see something amazing, and you'll see something that it just makes no sense at all, and it might be the same thing. Finally, the PlayStation State of Play returns this afternoon at 5 p.m. Eastern. What is one thing we might see revealed that would interest you?
Yeah, so this thing's supposed to be over 40 minutes long, so there's going to be a lot of game announcements and trailers. Kind of looking forward to hearing more about Death Stranding 2. But I think more than anything, I'm interested to kind of see Sony set the tone for 2025 for PlayStation. I think they had some pretty bad missteps last year, and I hope we don't see another awful live service game bomb, but yeah, there should be a lot more information coming out after this.
Yeah, it should be really interesting. And if anything does break that is of interest, we'll be talking about it on Friday's edition of the Nerdcast News Report. But that's going to wrap up Wednesday's edition of the Nerdcast News Report. And a lot of news, actually some breaking news with the Ricky Starks arrival last night on NXT. And we'll certainly keep an eye on who shows up next in WWE as we move forward. A reminder, we'll be back on Friday with the Nerdcast News Report, 9 a.m. Eastern Time, with all the latest news from our nerdy world. And then on Sunday, we'll be back with another episode of Music Weekly. It's the music of January the 31st coming up this Sunday night. Big thanks to everyone for joining us, including Rachel in the chat. Big thanks to Mike for joining me in the studio. Big thanks to Stove Lake Media for their continued support of the podcast. And a big thanks to you, wherever you might be checking us out, whether live or on the Vibe. That wraps things up. We'll be back on Friday with another edition of the News Report. Until then, don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.